You're on.
Welcome, welcome.
I'm your host, Nick. This is the Takedown with Nick, and this is actually our first monthly show. I'm basically going to be taking some time out of every month to come and sit down and just have a thought, have a basically a conversation about all the things that I've been thinking, about current events, and then whatever is going on in the news cycle and political analysis. We'll be doing all of that here. Once again, you can always find me at the Takedown Nick on Twitter. I'm also a member of the Progressive Army, and we're all under the flagship, the Benjamin Dixon Show, where we have this great, amazing platform to amplify voices and really try to broaden the discussion. So I'm very, very thankful for being a part of this and coming on board. And I actually want to thank all of you, whoever's out there, that have taken the time to come out and watch us for our first show. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the DNC email leaks. I was at lunch today. I think we were at a standard like cafe style grill or place, and we were picking up food. And I looked over at the newscast on MSNBC, and they were speaking to people about the actual DNC email leaks. And it has become apparent over time now that rather than actually focusing on the content of the leaks and what it means, there's a lot of speculation about it coming from a foreign government. And what I don't understand about this is this kind of, like I said, it's not actually focusing on the content of the emails. These emails are extremely important because this entire primary season, people have been talking about how Hillary Clinton has won fair and square. Bernie Sanders is just not a good candidate. He just doesn't understand what the issues are. They've even been claiming like an ideological supremacy in some cases. That this is where America really is. This is what people really think, and all of that nature, and all of that just comes from winning. Like in their minds, because they've won, they're right. And the idea that maybe they didn't win, or that they actually did something that's immoral is almost an anathema, right? So there's a thought that comes to my mind. It's just like, why are we not focusing on the actual content of the emails? And I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but first I want to talk about the one of the first sort of like results or blowback or backlash of the release of these emails, first by the Guccifer leaks, and then backed up by the WikiLeaks release. There is now a class action lawsuit that has been filed against the DNC for being impartial in the arbitration of the Democratic primary process. And basically, the argument is that everyone who was a Sanders supporter that also donated to the DNC or was involved in the DNC process has been, either they've been damaged. They've been damaged or aggrieved in some way, and they deserve recompense for that, right? Because if the DNC was really a neutral arbiter, and Bernie Sanders people gave to them based on that premise, and they weren't, it's like I'm not going to delve too much into the legal conflicts, into the legal context of it, because of course I'm not a lawyer, but it almost seems fraudulent, or there's something they're misrepresenting something along that nature, and so that's why this lawsuit has come forward. And I really think it's important to understand that this lawsuit is based upon fact-based evidence, not just, someone from Russia or something like that trying to manipulate our elections or to change things around for whatever reason that may be. I don't even know why that's relevant, but this lawsuit is actually very, very relevant. And I encourage all of our listeners to go to jampack.us / DNC class suit lawsuit. DNC lawsuit. Let me say that one more time. Jampack, JAMPAC.us / DNC lawsuit. That's the source where they actually talk about, what the actual details are concerning the lawsuit and what's actually going on. And I think that that's very, very important for everybody to take a look at and be aware of, because throughout this whole primary season, we've been told how, that Bernie Sanders lost fair and square, and that I'm sorry, Bernie Sanders has lost, Hillary Clinton has beaten him fair and square, and that, we should just get along, go along, get along, and move on, and stop protesting and stop trying to, delegitimize this win as if, everything that's coming out just doesn't exist. It all just gets swept under the rug. And I think that's wrong. Now, on the other hand, even though nothing ever happened and she won fair and square, because of these leaks, he has taken the time to begin replacing, shifting the heads around and trying to basically place fault on somebody to be like a sacrificial lamb. Chief among them, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Nobody on the progressive side really, really, really has a love for DWS, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. But I want everybody to understand something. If she steps down, I'm sorry, well, she's already stepped down now, right? After she's gone, what are we going to do about the damage that she did? Like, she's gone. She basically used her office to support one candidate over another and was not a neutral arbiter, excuse me. But where does that leave us after the damage is done? What recompense do we have? What recourse do we have now to maybe undo the damage? So she wrecked the house. How are we going to fix it? There's nothing that's been provided along those lines from the Democratic Party that's going to say like they're actually looking at maybe trying to redress that at all. That's whatever. It's done, move on, whatever else. And to me, that's just strange. So there were two things that really, really kind of, I guess I would say one primary thing that really stuck out to me in the actual email link. And that was when you go to media organizations and you are basically dictating what kind of coverage that you want them to give, what kind of message that you want them to be putting out. You're crafting like a narrative that's supposed to be propagated by these media institutions that are supposedly, neutral and they're source based and they do, objective journalism, but they're basically acting as the mouthpiece for a campaign. And that's deeply troubling that's allowed to go on and nobody thinks that there's something wrong with that. So if I were running for president and I go and I say, okay, from now on, you're only going to produce articles that are going to be supportive of me and not supportive of my opponent. Basically, I've kind of deputized you into my campaign. Like, you're now an arm of my campaign. You're my propaganda arm. You're there to basically push a message that I want you to push, that I'm editing, that I'm creating, and then you're propagating it through the media. And that's basically the news that people take as objective news. And so they think that this is all conclusions or these are all analyses that are come up with by the individual reporters or journalists. And that's not at all. It's just all coming from my campaign. I'm just using different organizations to push the same message, so to amplify the effect. And that's really just like propaganda 101. I mean, what did Bush say? You have to push the propaganda, right? Like, that's exactly what they're doing. And that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. I think on that regard, having an open collusion between a campaign and a media institution, along with the neutral arbiter that's going to be like having the power to actually change and control the process, using all three of those things together to slant the entire primary process in favor of one candidate over another, shows that they don't really have a respect for democracy. They didn't really want to leave democracy to do its thing. What they wanted to do was do their best to subvert democracy to their own will, to shape democracy as they want to see it. And you see that, throughout the entire process. Oh, we only want, our hardcore supporters to basically vote. We only want, independents to be allowed into the process when, all they have is a binary choice that we've put before them, not a real choice. And somebody said this the other day, that if you're trying to have a democracy, choice has to be at the forefront. Like, without real choice, there is no real democracy. And I have to agree with that. And if you're looking at these leaks and kind of what was leaked out there, it's beyond the pale. So now let's get to the other point that's being propagated now that I started off with, where it's a foreign government talking point. Like, they asked Julian Assange in an interview, and I think it was Anderson Cooper speaking to him about, and he just kept doing what I would call bad reporting. Like, if you watch the clip, like, he kept referring to how this was coming from outside sources and many people are saying this and there's evidence that X, Y, and Z. And then on MSNBC, today when I was at lunch, there was a guy supposedly from the intelligence community. We don't know where this guy came from. We don't know what his credentials are, but supposedly he's from the intelligence community, and he's saying for sure they have 100% conclusive evidence that it did indeed come from Russia and that they have enormous capability in all this. And this is all over the news everywhere. And what haven't they talked about? They haven't talked about what I just got through going over 5 minutes ago. And why aren't they talking about that? Because the content of those emails is not really supposed to be evaluated. What they want to do is make you think that because this stuff comes from Russia, or because somebody outside is doing this to manipulate or detract from Hillary Clinton unjustly or justly, I don't even know if they're trying to make that distinction, that it's not worth your notice. And I think everybody needs to take notice of what's going on. This stuff is very, very, very important. But what's weird about this, though, is even though they're using that tactic to combat the controversy that will come from these emails, the leaks, they're then turning around and trying to implicate Donald Trump as somehow linked to foreign governments, as though it's a talking point to go against him. And what's weird about that is, if a foreign government's involvement in the emails is somehow trying to manipulate our democracy or undermine the democratic process here in the United States, and that's a bad thing. And if Donald Trump has ties with foreign governments, and that's supposed to be a detraction from him taking office as the United States president, why is it then okay for all those foreign governments, those same entities that you're now saying are bad and trying to subvert democracy, those same entities are funneling money into your campaign? I'm sorry, not your campaign, into a nonprofit organization that members of your family runs, in excess of hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're doing this presumably, right, to buy access or to spread goodwill throughout the world. I don't know what the talking point would be, but it is my opinion that they send this money into that organization to buy influence. Now, you can argue that it doesn't buy influence with you. That's an argument that you could make, but I would say there's a feedback loop, right? So if they did this and then they do it again and again and again, how likely is it for them to continuously do that over a span of several years without ever getting anything in return for their investment? Like, at a certain point, you have to cut your losses, right? But the only reason why they're continuously investing in you and into the Clinton Foundation is because you're giving a good return on investment. I can't say it any simpler than that. You are giving a good return on investment, and that's why they're returning and investing with you over and over and over again. So this idea that it doesn't buy influence or that it subverts democracy in some way when in regards to your email scandals, or when it hurts you, it's bad. We don't need to pay attention to that. But if your opponent has the very same links that you have, it's okay to demonize them and say, well, this is just a plot and this is bad and Americans should be wary. It's like, again, propaganda 101. Now, in all of this, The last thing I'm going to say about the emails was Clinton's response and the DNC apology. So when they asked her about it, she says, well, I don't know about any of that. And I'm like, okay. You mean to tell me that in your campaign, you have high-level staffers that are going to the media with crafted narratives that are supposed to be pushed by the media, used by talking points on the campaign by you, and somehow you had nothing to do with any of that, or you didn't know any of that was going on? None of it. It was all unrelated. All of this action is happening around you, but you're not aware of any of it. Now, we're going to juxtapose that with the fact that we already know that the Clintons are very involved in controlling and running their campaigns. They are, political veterans or whatnot. So they don't just leave it to the professionals and let them make all the decisions. They're very involved. They have, very hands-on approaches to how to campaign, how to form the message, what they want their staffers to do. They're very hands-on. They micromanage a lot of things. But in this particular instance, they don't know anything. They're not involved with any of the collusion. They didn't coordinate in any way. Their staffers just did that of their own volition. That's a load of BS. There's no way anybody should believe that she didn't know any of this was going on and she didn't approve of it. We've seen how the Clinton Foundation has been used to reward writers and reporters who've done a good job. They become a liaison for the Clinton Foundation for a set number of years, and they move in and get another job at some other institution, which may or may not be, under the influence of the Clintons or somebody who owes a favor to the Clintons or whatnot else, or whatever else, right? So she's very, very, very much involved, and that answer was completely unacceptable. Now, when you move on to the DNC apology, I've already read it in a discussion I had with Anoa, I think at the beginning of the DNC convention. I read the email out loud, and the first thing that kind of came to my mind is they didn't talk about the actual content of the email. They tried to focus as much away from that as possible, in line with the media coverage on it so far, outside of, news sources like Democracy Now! And the Real News Network, places like that. They're actually trying to cover the content of the email and the email leaks and what it means, whereas other people are not. So, that is what it is. But the important point I was trying to make, but I just kind of ran out of a train of thought right there, was that in the same letter that's supposed to be apologizing for all the people who may or may not be Clinton supporters, offhand, who may be, they're their own people, right? In the same email that they sent out that apology, instead of just apologizing and letting it be that, they turned it into like a propaganda tool talking about, at this time, we need to all be pushing for unity and fighting for Hillary Clinton. And I feel like that's the wrong thing to tell people in the middle of an apology, from underhanded tactics used by the Clinton campaign to undermine the people that you're reaching out, the targeted audience. Their person they supported was likely Bernie Sanders. So to turn your apology into an ad for Hillary Clinton was terrible. It was like almost tone deaf. So on that point, I'll have to let that go. While I'm talking about the Clinton Foundation, though, right now we're kind of just rambling, right? I was driving, I would say the week before last, on a Sunday. I just got my car washed. I was driving, and MSNBC was doing their endless Hillary Clinton chant, the Hillary Clinton cheerleading. And I just didn't have time for that. So I decided to flick on to Fox Business News. Now, I know what you're going to think. Fox Business News is terrible. It's blah, 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 blah. Propaganda. Yes, it is. However, I do turn it on from time to time just to hear, just what they're saying on the station, just to hear it every so often, just like I watch MSNBC, just every so often, just to see what they're saying. And they were talking about something extremely interesting. And I think this is something that we as progressives really need to recognize, and that is outside of the Democratic Party, outside of left-leaning independents, outside of like hardcore leftists, there are other people in the political spectrum. And when they see, they're not going to be in, they're not going to be like highly nuanced. They're going to characterize the left as whatever is put in front of them. So right now, Hillary Clinton is the representative of the left to people who aren't within the left. And I mean, and to some people who actually are within the left in terms of their leaning ideologically, right? So the people that are outside are looking and they're seeing a huge problem. When I just spoke about the Clinton Foundation, how much money flows in and out of the Clinton Foundation, Fox News Business did a segment on it. And they linked the Clinton Foundation to some of the Clintons' activities that were going on in Haiti. And I think like one other country. And they spoke about how Hillary Clinton did a favor for this person after that person gave, a large multi-million-dollar donation to the foundation. And then they got the State Department actually pressured, or in some cases, like the president, the actual administration pressured another country to give this person, whether it be a lucrative mining contract or, some exclusive rights to mineral rights, or a contract to build like an industrial park, all of those things. And they connected the dots. Like, this person works in, this industry and he owns a private equity firm. However, he has nothing to do with mining, but he gives a couple of $100 million or several million to the Clinton Foundation. The Clinton Foundation leans in on a foreign government that they have high influence with, and he gets an exclusive mining contract, like sole rights to mine a particular resource, whether it be gold, diamonds, in that country. And it just goes to show you, the pay to play is still alive. We all talk about it, but they actually did a piece of honest journalism. And I know they don't like the Clintons, and I think that's what kind of gives them cover to do this, because they don't do it to their own politicians, right? They only do it to their political enemies. But they actually did clear journalism and showed that the Clinton Foundation, at the very least, is a massive conflict of interest. And it's unacceptable to have somebody, with that kind of power, having an organization that could act possibly as a conflict of interest, or, at the worst, a slush fund. That's literally something that any objective reader or any objective listener or any objective thinker or viewer has to look at and understand that this is problematic, that we have this as a representative of the left to people that, don't know much about the left. Now, you may say, okay, well, you don't need those people anyway. I would argue that you want to have your coalition as big as you can possibly get it, because it's going to have fractures and there's going to be fissures between the coalition. We're already experiencing that now. So you want to be able to have as many people as possible, maybe receptive to your message and receptive to your politics as you possibly can. So when you put up Hillary Clinton as this bastion of liberalism, as this progressive champion, as this fighter for women, as this selfless person who wants to serve the public and protect those who, don't have the power to protect themselves, and then the people on the outside look and they see something like this, they're just going to say, well, all that's BS. And they're not just going to paint that person as BS. They're going to paint that entire ideology as BS, because they see this corruption. And then, they'll go and talk to somebody who may be enlightened and they may know about it, and they'll say, well, yeah, but at least they're better than Republicans. That's not an answer. That's not an acceptable answer to give somebody outside of your ideology, that, hey, the politician that I happen to be biased towards, I'm just going to ignore blatant corruption, or I'm just going to ignore this highly suspect conflict of interest just because I'm biased towards that candidate. And then I'm going to call it something like, well, I'm an adult, or I'm smarter than you, or I know something that you don't know. That is problematic. I think that attitude is definitely a problem, and I think that's something we need to definitely check. And we see it running rampant in this election. In this election, we see the people that voted for Hillary Clinton, they've won by hook or by crook, by any underhanded tactic, they've won. And I think even on CNN, they said the problem is it's a question as to whether they won fair and square. No, it's not a question. It's pretty clear that they didn't win fair and square. The evidence is in. They definitely didn't win fair and square. I've done multiple segments, and I've spoke about it many times when it comes to actually like trying to verify and validate the actual election results, and that's all messed up. There's no way. A lot of things that happened in this election remind us of 2004. And then, even some cases 2000, where the elections were clearly stolen, and we just had to live with the results of stolen elections. And nobody ever did anything to make sure that couldn't happen again. It just kind of moved on. And that's hugely odd. But back to what I was saying. We see now that they're like, hey, we've won. Shut up and vote for our candidate. Or we've won. You need to stop protesting and fall in line and do what we say, or come to some sort of reasoning that we've come with, that this is the best we can do, and this is our candidate. We have to get in line behind this candidate. And all of this is highly condescending. It doesn't make anybody want to support your candidate when without actually redressing any of their grievances or any of their issues that they feel like you haven't addressed. You just tell them that none of that stuff matters, that they're just being a kid, and that you're the adult. And I think that's total BS. Like, you shouldn't be able to make those type of arguments and feel okay with it. And the reason why I say that is, if they have a legitimate grievance, why don't you actually address the actual issue and not just say that they're childish for having an issue that they care about deeply? Has anybody ever had an issue that they would just... I'm not even going to ask that question, because I know everybody who's watching, everybody who watches politics, everybody who follows politics, they have an issue that is dear to their heart, and they won't compromise on that issue. And if we look throughout history, other people have had issues that they would not compromise. And because they would not compromise those issues, we actually were able to have reform occur. And, we were actually able to have reform occur on the issue because they wouldn't compromise. They wouldn't say, well, I really believe this, but I'm just going to go ahead and vote even though you're not really covering my issue adequately. They didn't do that. And because they didn't do that, because they held fast to those moral imperatives, that's how we actually got change. So this idea that holding on to a moral imperative or holding on to an issue that you care very deeply about is childish is really, really problematic. It's going to stand in the way of actually having any real reform, because if everybody's just laying down those moral imperatives, we're just subject to whatever people give us rather than dictating the policy agenda. Like, you have to actually stand on something and dictate, say like, okay, this is where I am. And if you're not there, I'm not with you. And the politician's job is to say, okay, he may be lost to me. If too many people are lost to me because of my current stance, I need to move my stance so that I can pick up the requisite amount of people so that I can maintain election or maintain power, right? I'm going to move it away from the politician to just the party or, a group of people, a group of political party in general. I'm just going to leave it at party. So they have to basically figure out where they are in terms of what their current policies are and where the people are. But they don't ever have to reevaluate and change based on the feedback if they get feedback that, hey, I don't really have to move my positions. I can just be a little bit better than the next guy. I can just be a fraction of a hair better than the next guy, or even moderately better than batshit crazy. That's what the Republican Party is right now. It's basically crazy. I can just be, a little bit better than that, or even moderately better than that, but it's so far gone that in the end, it really doesn't matter for those people that are holding on to those moral imperatives. Like it doesn't do anything for them if they sacrifice that and just go along with just moderately better than batshit crazy. And so what I'm trying to say is, if you don't stand up for principle and fight for those principles and don't allow yourself to subject your principles to outside influence or outside propaganda or any kind of reason to give up those morals and just accept what already exists, if you don't fall victim to that, you can actually be a part of the coalition that actually pushes and actually gets change accomplished. Like that's actually how change works. If you're constantly compromising, you're not actually doing anything but accepting what's already there, because there's an amount of inertia. Like the current way that things are, there's an amount of inertia to it. Unless you're willing to countervail that and move in a different direction, you're not going to be able to change the current state. And I think that's a huge problem when people are looking at their politics. They're like, well, I have to vote based off of what somebody else, or I have to vote based off of what's given to me, not what I would like to see. And this is a huge pervasive thing throughout the entire political system. And if you look back, we've been voting like that for decade after decade after decade. And the question I would like to ask is, what's that gotten you? If you're voting like that and you're not really winning anything or changing anything, what are you accomplishing? I mean, I think I know what you're accomplishing. I would say you're not accomplishing anything, but there are those that would say, well, change is slow and blah, 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 blah. You're right. Change is slow. But change is only possible when you hold fast to principle and you fight for those principles, and slowly over time you get them. But you only get them by holding fast and be willing to withdraw support if they don't meet your threshold. If you're not willing to do that, you're not willing to change anything. And so now we're at this place now where people make it pragmatic. It's pragmatic to not have principle. It's pragmatic to basically give up your principle and just fall in line just because the other candidate is really bad. The other candidate will always be bad. That's not changing anytime soon. The other candidate will always be bad. And the only thing that's likely to come out of that is basically the interests that have bought both parties, both the major parties, the interests that have controlled them and dominated the agenda will basically win, because they have both sides covered. If you don't want to support the Democrats, that's fine. They've got the Republicans covered. If you all of a sudden the Republicans do some crazy stuff and it ends up damaging the economy and making us lose face all around the world, and it ends up with these terrible consequences for the lives of everyday people, that's okay, because the Democrats will be swept in. And what will they do? They will do that same agenda that the Republicans did, because their bases are covered with both parties. And I'm not saying every single Democrat is corrupt. I'm not saying every single Republican is corrupt. I would say, most Republicans are just generally wrong based on the ideology that they subscribe to or the way they believe the world works. And then Democrats, by ceding some of the talking points to the Republicans, have occupied a space where Republicans traditionally used to have. So oftentimes on many things having to do with economics, they're oftentimes in the wrong, in my opinion, because again, I'm not here to feed you my truth, right? But they're oftentimes wrong as well. And so the question is, if both sides, on many issues are close enough together on the wrong spectrum that you don't agree with them, well, what do? The answer is you have to be brave and be courageous and say, well, either I'm going to take one party and change it by any means necessary, or I'm going to leave. And that's really the conclusion I've come to personally, is as far as this election is concerned, because pragmatists, they always talk about pragmatism and we have to think about this and we have to think about that. But do you notice they never bring up any type of long-term analysis. And what I mean by this is, what would be the results of a Hillary Clinton presidency? Like, they make it seem as though, we're saved from Donald Trump. Okay, so Donald Trump is not in there. Hillary Clinton wins. What would be the result of a Hillary Clinton presidency? Some people say, well, okay, we'll get some seats on the court, on the Supreme Court. Okay, that's a fair argument to make. But what would those seats actually do to benefit any sort of agenda moving forward? At best, the appointees that Hillary Clinton would select would not move us forward. They would just keep us where we are. And to many Americans out there, where we are is on a downward trajectory. So holding the line in a downward trajectory doesn't really increase or improve the lives of thousands of people, possibly millions of people that are out there. That is not that's not actually doing anything for a lot of people. So now you have this representative of the left holding the line on a downward trajectory instead of improving the lives of people. So what will that probably do? I mean, it could likely, maybe we beat this Trump, but 4 years from now, we have another Trump. And, in the midterms, we get, 10 or 15, 20 or 30 more Trumps in the legislature. Like, nobody talks about this type of analysis. Like, we have to be honest. We already know that Hillary Clinton is a corporatist. She's a neoliberal. She's going to expand, military intervention. She's not really going to make much progress in terms of economically benefiting the people who are poor and suffering, the people who are least represented in our system today. Her goals are not to address those issues. And those people, that ground that she chose not to tread is just fertile ground. There's plenty of votes to be picked up there by the right. And they're gonna go in there and they're gonna get those votes. And so while we don't get them today, a couple of years from now, well, we're gonna get them anyway because we're not addressing the underlying issue. The underlying issue is that people are suffering and they feel like their political process is doing nothing about it. And when you're at that place of despair, it's real easy for a strong man or anybody with a loudspeaker or anybody with a large propaganda engine to pump out any message that they put and call it good. It's easy for anybody back behind that kind of infrastructure to take advantage of the moment and swoop in and just rip to shreds any type of establishment candidate, especially ones that have been in there and are seen as the face of oppression for millions of people that are suffering. It'll be so easy for them to just come in and beat that. And the reason why I can say this is because look at the elections, just the election season right now. Hillary Clinton is in a near tie with Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton is in a near tie with Donald Trump. I want that to sink in for everybody that believes Hillary Clinton is this unbeatable candidate. She's in a near tie with Donald Trump. But if Hillary Clinton is not enough, that this is all forecasting, right? It's not set in stone. Let's look back at the Obama administration. Under the Obama administration, Democrats lost 800 elected offices across the country. And Obama's a lot more well-liked than Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is hated. There's a special brand or a special amount of hatred out there that's just reserved just for her. Don't know why they have a particular interest in her or why they hate her so much. But under Barack Obama, he didn't have that much hate. He has racism working against him, but he didn't have the same kind of hatred that Hillary Clinton has. Maybe it's a wash. Maybe the racism is stronger. Maybe not. I'm not sure. I can't measure it. But under his presidency, the Hope and Change, we lost 800 elected seats across the country. That is what happens when you turn to like a neoliberal approach to addressing the grievances that are growing out of control. That is what happens when you try to hold the line on a downward trajectory. That is a result of that. And anybody who believes this last election cycle or the 2010 election cycle wasn't a referendum on Democrats and how poorly they did in terms of advancing an agenda that would help the vulnerable people in this country, is just selling you nonsense. Neoliberalism provides fertile soil for neo-fascism. You put the neoliberal in there, and you might avoid neo-fascism today. You might avoid it tomorrow. But next week, next year, next election, it's going to come until you address the issues that the neoliberal refuses to address. They're always going to be there waiting in the wings to take over. And, on the other side of that, it's not just that the people are suffering. It's also that there are people in the Democratic Party that still live the illusion that neoliberalism can provide some sort of lasting change or generate some kind of incrementalist change in America. There are still a large number of people on the left that still believe that. I'm not one of them, but I know 10 years back, I definitely was one of those people. And it's real easy to fall into that. You say, well, Rome wasn't built overnight, or change didn't come overnight. So let's take a look at the incrementalist approach. So let's say you're trying to get 100%, and every 4 to 8 years you get 4%, right? It would take you a long amount of time to actually realize the full goal that you are trying to achieve, going 4% at a time, and you're trying to get 100%. And I would say, let's say, in order for people to feel a real difference in their lives, you need to at least get 60 to 80% before they really can feel that. For some reason, I lost internet connection for a second. Now, for the life of me, I can't remember exactly where I cut out, but I'm just going to start back where we're talking about change with the neoliberals. It's a very incremental approach. And let's say you're doing 5% at a time. It's going to take at least 60 to 80% before people really feel a large enough difference in their everyday life, a large enough improvement in their everyday life to recognize and understand that it's from something outside of what they're doing. So if you have a situation where people are getting higher wages, they're not going to associate that necessarily with you unless it's like a drastic difference where it's clear that these higher wages or this new environment that they're living in or that they're prospering from is actually coming from something external. So I actually overdid exactly how much content I wanted to cover today, but we're just going to try to make it as far as we can. So now you're going 5% at a time. This is per election cycle. So this is every 4 years, you're moving 5% towards that goal. How long does it take you to get to 60% at 5% at a time? So you would have to win election and control the political process, 12 elections in a row, uninterrupted, to actually get 60% of the change that you wanted to achieve from some sort of incremental approach. Maybe if you're doing 10% at a time, you would have to win 6 elections in a row. That's 24 years you have to dominate the political system in order to get 60% of what you want. And anybody that points to the New Deal and says, well, the New Deal wasn't built overnight. I was like, no, 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 no. The New Deal actually was built overnight. Day one, you didn't have this. Roosevelt comes in, fights for it. Within 1 year, you have all of this stuff. Yes, it wasn't in the exact same form it is today. Black people were not allowed. Black people were not really included in the New Deal, and Social Security didn't cover all of the retirement population. But that doesn't mean that you have to do, well, we're going to cover 5% of the population at a time, or we're going to do a little bit at a time. No, no, no. You get 80% up front, where it actually creates a large enough difference in people's lives, and that difference is positive, and it's across the ideological spectrum. Today, nobody says Social Security was a bad idea. Nobody says unemployment insurance was a bad idea. And the people that do say that, they're on the fringe. I'm talking about the populists. Nobody believes that those things should be taken away or gotten rid of, from some ideological perspective, right? And that's because they made a positive impact in enough people's lives that is recognized by society. And if you want to make positive change going forward, that's the model you have to follow. You have to actually 80% up front, and then the remaining 20%, you can just get that, piecemeal by, election by election, but not 5% at a time. It'd have to be, the last 20% next election, or the last 20%, 2 terms later, the next 10 years. You have that much time to just get that last 20%. But the point is, you have to get the benefits up front, or else people won't recognize it, and you won't build a broad enough base of people that will support it and kind of keep the opposition from being able to take it away. A good example is the UK. Once they had national health care, like, the right has been trying to take it away, but they can't. So they have to pretend like they support it and then try to undermine it from within. But that's a easier battle for the opposition, because they can just point to that and say, well, hey, look, you're undermining it. We're going to undo that. And they can just undo it, right? So that's where we want to be. That's an easier position to hold than trying to get something that nobody has and nobody can really perceive what it would do for them outside of some rhetoric. And I know I had an analogy here, and it's basically a physics analogy. If you had like a rock and, you needed 50 newtons to move that rock, you can't just say, hey, I did 10 newtons. The problem solved. The rock is not going to move until you actually apply a force exceeding the requirement. Then the rock will move. Maybe after the rock starts moving, you've overcome static friction, and, friction in motion is going to be a lot less, right? So you don't have to necessarily have the full 51 after it starts moving. But to get it moving, you need that first huge amount of effort to get over that point. And this is what I'll say about compromise. If we know we need 50 newtons, we can't say, well, I did 25. That's better than nothing. The rock didn't move. Our goal was to move the rock. It was not to say we did something and then go home and the rock is still in the exact same place it was yesterday, or the day before that, or the last decade. That's not the goal. At some point you have to say, well, if I compromise the goal, which is to give it enough momentum to be able to move it, I'm no longer accomplishing my objective, which is to move the rock. And this goes back to what I was saying. If you don't stick to those moral imperatives, hold fast to them, whether because you're courageous, whether because you're stubborn, whether because you have a deep empathy for those who are suffering, or those who, just haven't found justice in our world. Whatever your motivation is, it really doesn't matter too much to me. But the point is, you have to hold on to that and realize we need 51 newtons to move the rock. Let's move the rock. That's really all I can say as far as compromise. I wanted to talk about a debate that had occurred on Democracy Now! And I guess what I'll do is probably next month, I'll make sure to have them included in the content. So we'll actually speak specifically about that. But I'm just going to mention one talking point that the Hillary supporter used that really picked up and really actually, like, maybe I was like, what is that? That really made me cringe a little bit. And that was when she said, "You aren't excited to vote for the first woman? This is historic, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, okay, it's okay that the first woman would be a historic thing. But what's more important than having the first Black president or having the first woman president is what is the actual result of them using that office, them occupying that office. What do I believe that they would do for me? What do I believe they would do for other people that I may happen to empathize with? What do I think they would do for the country as a whole in terms of moving it towards something I would like to see? Those are really what I ask myself when I'm voting for a candidate, not what their gender is. Because if it's a woman or a man who steps on your foot, who cuts in front of you in line, who cuts you off, or doesn't go when the stoplight is green, the response is the same. Like, their gender doesn't matter in those gender neutral interactions, right? You know, what's important is what they're actually going to do, what they actually represent, what their plans are, what their beliefs are, and how that's going to manifest itself in policy. And on that note, I'm just going to go ahead and, of course, close the line. I want to thank everybody for being here with the show. This was our first edition. This is just me basically ranting, but we'll have it moving forward. Thank you.